At a struggling elementary school in Mississippi, a kind-hearted black teacher gave a pair of shoes to his student because the boy was so poor that he felt ashamed, so poor that he couldn't afford to buy shoes for himself. But the very shoes that brought the boy hope became the sharp scissors that cut off the teacher's career. His act of kindness sparked outrage. Accused of favoritism and condemned by state officials who saw compassion as a violation, he was fired without warning. But he didn't expect that his story quickly spread, and he got a call helped open a new, much bigger door, one he had never thought possible. Jaden Carter had always believed that teaching was more than a job, it was a responsibility, a promise to see the children that the world often overlooked. That belief was what kept him coming back to Oakwood Elementary, a struggling public school in South Jackson, Mississippi, where peeling paint curled away from the walls and fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. The air smelled of old textbooks and industrial cleaner, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. The school was underfunded, overburdened, and filled with children who had already learned, far too young, that life would not hand them anything easily. Jaden knew that lesson well. He had grown up just like them, a black boy sitting at a scuffed wooden desk, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in his stomach, the too tight shoes pinching his toes, the way some teachers looked at him like he was a problem waiting to happen. He had spent his childhood navigating a world that told him, again and again, that kids like him weren't supposed to dream too big. That memory stayed with him, an old wound that never fully healed, fueling his determination to be the teacher he wished he had back then. He wasn't just here to teach math and history, he was here to see them, to remind them they mattered. And he saw Elijah Walker. Elijah was 10 years old, painfully quiet, always keeping his head down as if trying to disappear. He was one of Jaden's brightest students, but he never spoke unless called on, never raised his hand unless he was absolutely sure of the answer. He had the kind of silence that didn't come from shyness, it came from learning, too soon, that drawing attention to yourself could mean trouble. Jaden recognized that silence. He had lived it. It was a cold November morning when Jaden noticed something that made his chest tighten. Elijah's shoes were falling apart. The soles had nearly detached, the fabric frayed at the edges, exposing his socks through jagged holes. Every step he took made the rubber flop against the tile, a quiet, humiliating sound. The boy tried to hide it, tucking his feet under his chair. But Jaden saw the way his shoulders hunched, the way he barely met anyone's eyes. Then recess came, and humiliation struck. A group of boys, led by Connor Williams, one of the wealthier white kids in class, had zeroed in on Elijah. Connor was the kind of child who had never known hunger, never worn the same pair of shoes until they fell apart, never been made to feel small for something he had no control over. He leaned against the playground fence, arms crossed, his smirk dripping with cruel amusement. "Damn Elijah," he sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Where'd you get those shoes? The trash?" Laughter erupted around them. Elijah stiffened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. Jaden watched from a distance, anger burning under his skin, a deep, familiar rage that came from seeing something he had lived through unfold right in front of him. Elijah said nothing. He just shrank into himself, tucking his feet further under the bench, as if that could make the laughter stop. Jaden wanted to step in, to shut it down, but he knew words wouldn't fix this. What Elijah needed wasn't a lecture on bullying. What he needed was dignity. That night, Jaden sat in his tiny apartment, his dinner barely touched as he replayed the moment over and over in his mind. He had seen so many kids like Elijah, kids who learned, young, that the world would not protect them. Kids who carried their shame like a weight on their back, heavier with every cruel word, every reminder that they had less. Jaden had spent his life fighting to prove that he was more than what society expected him to be, and now he saw that same battle in Elijah's hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. He didn't hesitate. After his evening shift at the diner, one of 2 side jobs he worked to make ends meet, he stopped by a small shoe store on his way home. He didn't pick the most expensive pair, nor the flashiest ones. Just something sturdy, something warm, something that would let Elijah walk without shame. The next morning, before the students arrived, Jaden slipped into the classroom early. He found Elijah's locker, placed the shoes inside carefully, and tucked a folded note on top. For a brilliant young man. Walk tall. Then he stepped back and exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He had done something good, something right. What he didn't know was that before the day was over, that single act of kindness would cost him everything. The moment Elijah found the shoes, a light flickered in his eyes, a light Jaden had never seen before. He stood in front of his locker, hands trembling as he lifted them, his fingers tracing the clean fabric, the sturdy soles. His lips parted in silent disbelief, as if he didn't trust what he was seeing. For a few seconds he just stared, his breathing uneven. Then, cautiously, as if expecting someone to snatch them away, he slipped off his old, torn shoes and placed his feet into the new pair. They fit perfectly. For the first time in weeks, Jaden saw Elijah smile. Not the small, hesitant ones he sometimes gave when answering a question correctly, but a real, unguarded smile, a glimpse of the carefree child he should have been. The sight made the long nights, the extra shifts, all the exhaustion worth it. Jaden didn't need thanks. Seeing Elijah walk taller, his shoulders a little straighter, was enough. But peace never lasted long in places like Oakwood. It started with Rebecca Whitmore. She was the kind of teacher who clung to rules like a drowning person clings to a life vest, not because she believed in fairness, but because rules gave her control. A white woman in a predominantly black school, she saw herself as the gatekeeper of order, the enforcer of discipline. And when she saw Elijah walking into class that morning, his new shoes catching her attention, something inside her twisted. She waited until lunchtime before pulling Elijah aside. "Where did you get those shoes?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Elijah hesitated, fingers tightening around the hem of his sweater. I found them in my locker," he admitted quietly. Rebecca's lips pursed. "Someone gave them to you?" He nodded. That was all she needed. An hour later, Jaden was called into Principal Brian Thornton's office. The man sat behind his desk, stiff as a board, his expression unreadable. Rebecca stood beside him, arms crossed, radiating self-righteousness. The moment Jaden stepped in, he knew this wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. Thornton folded his hands together, his wedding band clinking against the desk. "Jaden," he began, his tone measured, "we have a problem." Jaden didn't sit. His stomach had already started sinking. "What problem?" Thornton sighed, like he was dealing with a child who couldn't grasp simple logic. "It's come to my attention that you gave a student an unsanctioned gift." Jaden's jaw clenched. He glanced at Rebecca, whose face remained cold, detached. "Unsanctioned?" he repeated. "I bought a student a pair of shoes because his were falling apart. That's not a crime." Thornton exhaled sharply. "It's not about the shoes, Jaden. It's about fairness. You can't single out students for special treatment. Parents are already upset." Jaden's head snapped up. "Parents?" His voice dropped. "Or one parent?" Thornton shifted uncomfortably. That was it. One complaint. One entitled, white parent who had seen a black boy get something their child hadn't. And suddenly kindness became favoritism. Charity became a violation. Jaden straightened. "I didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't tell the class. I didn't put him on display." He looked at Thornton, willing him to see reason. "You've seen this school. You know how many of these kids go home hungry, wearing the same clothes day after day. If the system won't help them, what are we supposed to do? Just watch?" Thornton's face hardened. "We follow protocol." Jaden scoffed. Protocol. The word felt disgusting on his tongue. And what does protocol say about a 10-year-old kid walking around with holes in his shoes? Rebecca finally spoke. "It says he should get help the right way through official school programs, approved resources, not through a teacher handing out gifts like some savior." Her eyes narrowed. "We can't have students thinking they're entitled to handouts." Something inside Jaden snapped. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "Entitled," he repeated, his voice eerily calm. "A kid who walks 3 miles to school because his mother can't afford gas. A kid who eats 1 meal a day, if he's lucky. That's entitlement to you." Rebecca didn't flinch. "It sets a precedent," she said simply. "If every teacher did what you did, there would be chaos." Jaden let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, can't have teachers caring too much, huh?" Thornton cut in before the argument escalated. His voice was clipped, final. "Jaden, I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. The board will convene in 3 days to determine your employment status." Jaden's heart slammed against his ribs. "You're suspending me for helping a child." Thornton's gaze didn't waver. "You left us no choice." Jaden let the words sink in. No choice. Like kindness was a punishable offense. Like morality had to be regulated. He forced himself to breathe, to keep his voice steady. "And when they fire me," he said quietly, "when you strip me of my job, what lesson will that teach Elijah?" Thornton didn't answer. Neither did Rebecca. Because they both knew the answer. Jaden walked out without another word. He refused to beg for a job that demanded he look the other way while children suffered. 3 days later, the school board made their decision. Jaden Carter was officially terminated from Oakwood Elementary. And just like that, a good teacher was erased. The news of Jaden Carter's termination spread fast. The halls of Oakwood Elementary felt emptier without him, the absence of his steady presence leaving a noticeable void. Some teachers whispered their sympathies in hushed voices, but none dared to openly oppose the administration. Parents exchanged knowing glances, some shaking their heads in frustration, others too afraid to challenge a system that had already proven its ruthlessness. But it was the students who felt it the most. Elijah Walker sat in the back of his classroom, his head low, his new shoes suddenly feeling heavier than before. Guilt gnawed at him, an unbearable weight pressing against his small chest. The other kids barely spoke to him, their eyes full of pity or quiet resentment. He was the boy who cost Mr. Carter his job. At home, his mother, Monique Walker, had watched the news unfold with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Jaden Carter had done what the school system refused to do. He had seen her son, really seen him, and tried to help, and they punished him for it. She wasn't the only one who felt that way. By the end of the week, a small movement had started online. A parent had taken to Facebook, sharing the story of how Jaden was fired for giving a student a pair of shoes. The post exploded overnight. Dozens of parents commented, some recounting stories of how Jaden had stayed late to tutor their kids for free, how he had bought classroom supplies out of his own pocket when the school refused to provide them. Within days, local news stations picked up the story. "Beloved teacher fired for helping student in need" was plastered across headlines, the outrage spreading like wildfire. People debated it on social media, some defending the school's policy, but many, especially those who had lived through the kind of poverty Elijah faced, saw the injustice for what it was. And that was how Dominic Hayes, a billionaire with a kind heart, found him. Jaden was sitting in his cramped one-bedroom apartment, staring at the rejection emails piling up in his inbox. He had spent the last week applying for teaching jobs, but the stain of his termination followed him like a shadow. No principal wanted to touch a teacher who had been fired under controversy, no matter how absurd the reason was. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Mr. Carter." The voice was deep, smooth, and filled with a quiet authority. "My name is Dominic Hayes. I run the Bright Futures Initiative. I believe we have something to discuss." Jaden frowned, sitting up. Bright Futures. A non-profit focused on providing educational resources for underprivileged communities, Dominic explained. "I saw your story. Read about what you did for that boy. We need people like you, Mr. Carter. Teachers who care." Jaden let out a sharp breath, rubbing his forehead. He had spent the past week drowning in disappointment, anger, self-doubt. Now, a complete stranger was offering him a lifeline. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hayes, I do," but he hesitated. "I don't know if I can do this again. The system doesn't want teachers like me." Dominic chuckled. "The system doesn't. But the kids do." That silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Then Dominic said something that changed everything. "We're launching a new initiative," he explained. "A mentorship program for kids in high-risk communities, kids like Elijah. We need someone to lead it. Someone who understands them, who's lived their struggles. Someone who won't turn a blind eye." A pause. Then, "With certainty, we need you, Jaden." Jaden swallowed hard. He had spent years fighting a losing battle within a broken system, a system that punished compassion and protected bureaucracy. For the first time, someone was offering him a way to make a real difference without asking him to compromise his morals. He exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "When do we start?" Jaden sat in his car outside Bright Futures Initiative, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The sun had barely begun to set, casting long golden streaks across the windshield, but he hardly noticed. His mind was still caught in the past, in the last few weeks that had ripped his career apart and left him standing at the edge of uncertainty. He should have been excited. He should have been grateful. Dominic Hayes had handed him a second chance, one that didn't come with restrictions, one that wouldn't punish him for doing what was right. Yet, for all the hope threaded through that opportunity, a nagging voice in the back of his mind wouldn't let him forget what had happened. They fired you for caring. What made him think this would be any different? His fingers drummed restlessly against the steering wheel. Maybe he wasn't ready to fight again. Maybe Elijah's crushed expression in the hallway, the whispers of his students, the betrayal from colleagues who had stood by and watched him be erased, maybe all of it had drained him more than he realized. A soft knock at the window pulled him back to reality. He turned and found Monique Walker standing outside, arms folded, her eyes sharp but kind. He rolled down the window slowly. "You just gonna sit here all night?" she asked, raising a brow. Jaden exhaled a laugh that barely sounded like one. "Thinking about it." She leaned against the door, studying him. "You know, I never got the chance to thank you for what you did for Elijah." "You don't have to," he said. "Yeah," she muttered, shaking her head. "I do." Her voice softened. "Because people like you, I all don't get enough thanks. You just keep on giving, and giving until the world takes everything from you. And even then, you still try to give more." Jaden swallowed hard, looking away. She sighed, tapping her fingers against the car. "Elijah ain't been the same since you left. You were the first teacher to see him. Not just his grades, not just his attendance, but him. You don't know how much that meant." Jaden's chest tightened. He did know. He knew because he had been Elijah once. A kid who had learned early on that the world wouldn't hand him anything, who had stopped expecting kindness because disappointment was easier to carry. And he knew what it felt like when someone, just one person, saw past the struggle and reminded you that you were worth something. That's what Jaden had tried to do for Elijah, and they had taken it from him. But had they really? The realization hit him all at once. They had fired him from a school, not from his purpose. They had taken away his classroom, but not his ability to change lives. He looked at Monique, his decision suddenly clear. Would Elijah want to be part of something new? Her eyes flickered with curiosity. What kind of something? Jaden smiled for the first time in weeks. "Give me some time to figure that out." That night he called Dominic. "I'm in," he said. "Tell me what I need to do." And just like that, Jaden Carter stopped looking at what he had lost and started building something new. 6 months later, the world looked different. Jaden stood at the front of a crowded community center in South Jackson, dressed in a simple button-down and slacks, watching as a room full of kids who had been ignored, dismissed, forgotten settled into their seats. The Bright Futures Initiative had grown faster than anyone expected, and Jaden had been at the center of it all. He had built something here. Not a classroom constrained by policies that punished compassion. Not a school bound by outdated rules that protected bureaucracy over children. This was different. This was a space where kids like Elijah didn't have to hide their struggles, where they weren't reduced to test scores or discipline reports, where they were finally seen. The door at the back of the room opened, and Elijah walked in, his shoulders straighter than Jaden had ever seen them. He wasn't alone. His mother was with him, along with 2 other kids from Oakwood, Luis Hernandez, Ava Brown, kids who had watched what happened to Jaden. Kids who had been waiting to see if kindness could survive in a world that had tried to crush it. Jaden felt something catch in his throat. They believed in him. He cleared his throat and turned back to the group. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Let's get started." The day flew by in a blur of lessons, conversations, laughter, the kind that came from kids who finally felt like they belonged. By the time the event ended, parents trickled in, talking to mentors, signing their kids up for more programs, thanking Jaden for creating something real. And then, as the crowd thinned, Elijah walked up to him. He was quiet for a moment, shifting on his feet. Then, he looked Jaden in the eyes and spoke with a confidence that hadn't been there before. "You were right," Elijah said. "They didn't take anything from you." Jaden let out a breath. "No," he agreed. "They didn't." Elijah nodded, then hesitated before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a crumpled note. Jaden recognized it immediately. "For a brilliant young man. Walk tall." Jaden stared at it, then at Elijah, something deep in his chest tightening. "I kept it," Elijah admitted, "because I wanted to remember what it felt like. When someone believed in me." Jaden's throat burned, but he managed a small smile. "And do you believe in yourself now?" Elijah met his gaze and nodded. "Yeah, I do." Jaden rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. This was why he had fought. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but for this moment. For kids like Elijah to stand a little taller, to believe they mattered. He had lost a job, but he had found something bigger. He had found his purpose. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.